Well, it looks like one championship is in trouble. One championship, one MMA, kickboxing, Muay Thai, MMA fights. They are in trouble. They are bleeding. They are sinking. And it was said by one of their executives that unless they get another round of seed investment, they could potentially go under or up for sale to whoever the buyer will be. PFL probably. It's probably going to be PFL. PFL is buying everybody who's failing from the looks of it. But let me tell you exactly what the problem is. Whether you're talking about one championship, PFL, Bellator, or anybody else that is kind of in the MMA space other than the UFC, and why they are losing and why they will continue to lose and why they will always lose to the UFC. Ultimate punch. The one thing that the UFC does better than absolutely everybody is they build their organization around their fighters. Yes, the UFC is a brand household name now, but it wasn't always that way. They always built themselves up around the fighters and the stars that their media and their marketing strategies helped create. Now, there's a little bit of an it factor with everything. But let me ask you a question. How did you figure out that one championship exists? Honestly, answer me that question. Don't say it's because you're a hardcore fan, because you know everything about Muay Thai, and that you've been a fight fan since UFC 1 and That we all know that's not the case. For 90% of you MMA fans out there, the reason you know about one championship, the reason I know about one championship, is because Demetrius Johnson went over there and fought for them. Can you name 5 people on the one championship roster? Demetrius Johnson and Rod Tag. Those are the 2 I can name. I don't know anybody else on their roster. Why? Because Demetrius Johnson was a former UFC fighter. He also got a better deal, better pay, all these other type of things. But his star power moved over to one championship. That's the only reason, I know they exist. That's the only reason I have even tried to tune into any of their fights, because I know a guy on there who's fighting. And now because of him, I know about Rod Tang too, who's apparently this great Muay Thai guy. Whatever. Who knows? It's the old saying, if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one around to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, this is the problem. And I realize that one championship probably has a lot of fans in Asia. That seems to be their target market, their target demographic. It's what it appears to be. However, let's be honest when we say the real money is in the North American and Western market. Let's be honest about that. And another thing we need to be honest about is the fact that you are not going to get anybody in any market to tune in unless you give them a compelling reason to do so. See, I think the mistake that every organization other than the UFC makes is they think that us enjoying MMA is about the fights. That's a part of it, but it's a small part of it. Chael Sonnen talks about this all the time on his channel. The reason we tune in is not because we want to see the punches and kicks and the arm bars and the rear naked chokes. It's because we want to hear a story. Why are these people fighting? Why are they fighting? Why are the people in one fighting? I don't even know the people who are in one who are fighting, and I certainly don't know why they're fighting. Only that they're getting paid to do so. Boring. Nobody cares about that. What they want is a compelling reason to get behind a fighter. What we want is a compelling reason to get behind a fighter. I'll give you an example. The first fighter that I ever truly got behind was Georges St. Pierre. I've told this story before. It was back in 2012 when I first really started to tune into MMA. And somebody told me that, no, Georges St. Pierre, this Canadian guy, is more famous than Wayne Gretzky. I thought he was out of his mind. But then he told me, look, Wayne Gretzky may be the most famous Canadian inside of Canada, the most famous athlete in Canada, but outside of Canada, other than maybe European markets or whatever, nobody follows hockey. But so many people follow combat sports and MMA and this type of thing in Asia and Thailand and Philippines and all these different places. So the compelling story was this was a Canadian guy who is the best in the world at a sport that most Canadians probably don't even follow or pay attention to. That was compelling. And there are so many stories like that in the UFC. The UFC does a masterful job. It is a masterclass in building up a story behind fighters. Even the guys who are coming in to the UFC, right? Even the low-level guys who are on the undercard, who are on the early prelims, even those guys, the UFC gives a couple minutes for them to say their piece to the world who might be watching. And they give them a little bit of an intro about, he's going through this, he's going through that, but that is why he is determined to win tonight for his daughter, for his son, for his family, for his mother. They humanize the fighters in there, and they give us a compelling reason, albeit brief, about why we should care about why they're fighting right now. Now, again, it is on the fighters themselves, and the UFC fighters do a great job of this, to build themselves up and to turn themselves into that marketing machine. But the UFC does it a little bit with their fighters, whereas I don't hear any of that from One Championship. And I certainly don't hear it from PFL or Bellator. I do a little bit, but that's because I seek out that information. But let's go down the list. PFL. Name 5 fighters on their roster. 5. Francis Ngannou, former UFC. Derek Brunson, former UFC. Who else? Jake Paul? Okay, that's kind of an exception. Anybody else? Name anyone. Come on, I'm waiting. They don't have any compelling stories behind any of the guys. The only reason I heard about this guy who just won the other day, I don't even remember his name now, was because Sean Strickland, a UFC title holder, basically said, hey, this guy's striking is unmatched. He's the guy who got face kicked in the head by Buckley, right? And then became a champion in PFL. Name a Bellator fighter. No, but I would say Bellator did the best job other than the UFC, but it still wasn't good enough. Like Usman Nurmagomedov is the guy that comes to my mind. Why? Because he's a cousin of the GOAT, Khabib. The grand majority of the fighters you've heard of because they have some form of association to a fighter that was once in the UFC. And that's all because the UFC does a great job of getting the fighter's story. It's one of these things that the UFC is going to be unmatched because they don't make their... it is about the fights a little bit, right? But Chael talks about this all the time. It's more about why are we fighting? Why are they fighting? Well, it's because he wants a championship. It's because he wants to be the best. Okay, that's something. But the ones that sold the biggest in the world, the ones that put people on the map, it's about more than that. It's about a story. It's about a villain. It's about a good guy. It's about a rivalry. It's about getting revenge. All of these kind of human emotions that the UFC kind of puts into the fights that they do. It's not about the punches. It's not about the kicks, the arm bars, the submissions, the rear naked chokes, the wrestling, the grappling. All of that is a byproduct. We all want to see that stuff. But guess how many people tune in? Look. One of the things that Jake Paul did masterfully, and these misfit boxing guys and whoever, the boxing isn't that great. I don't know much about boxing, but it certainly isn't a super high level competition. I don't even know how to watch boxing. But what Jake Paul did was he would take retired fighters and he'd say, hey, I'm a YouTube kid. I'm going to see if I can beat this guy. Then everyone would be like, oh, no, you're not going to beat him. He's an MMA fighter. But the story was this young guy's beating a former professional athlete in combat sports and boxing. And he basically made his name in combat sports in this way. How many of you have tuned into boxing in the last year for anything other than Jake Paul, Logan Paul, KSI, these type of things? Francis Ngannou? What else? When else did you tune into boxing? Never. Because there was a compelling story there about someone who should get their ass kicked by a professional combat sports athlete, but somehow manages to overcome. So what is the story for fighters in the PFL? What's the story for the fighters in the One Championship? The biggest thing that the UFC has on their side is their content and their storytelling machine. To me, that is the biggest gap that I don't think will ever be filled. And that is the reason why so many of these guys have come and gone and the UFC has remained. It's because they realize that it's more about the fighter's story. They realize it's more about making a compelling reason for people to watch the fight, as opposed to just the punches and the kicks and the competition and this and that. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that some of you hardcore guys out there, you really do want to tune in to see that, right? But the sport is built off of casual fans. The sport is built off of the random guys who tune in at one point in time because they heard Conor McGregor is fighting. Or this guy, he's this Russian guy who's mauling everybody. Oh, geez, I want to see that. If one championship goes under, who cares? They haven't given me much of a reason to tune in other than Mighty Mouse. PFL goes under, why should I care? What reason is there for me or any of you to tune in? What's the story? Now, PFL might be coming up because now the story is they've got a David versus Goliath kind of thing and they're coming for the lunch of the UFC. The other part of it too is the marketing from everywhere other than the UFC. So the UFC masterfully thing in front of puts the right piece of content in front of you at the right time. Their marketing department is second to none. And if I want to consume other MMA content, whether it's from one, PFL, Bellator, Karate Combat's a little bit better than the others in my opinion, but I have to actually seek it out, right? I have to subscribe to their channel, subscribe to their thing, whatever. But I have seen content from the UFC that's shared by hundreds, if not thousands of fans. I've rarely seen content shared by one fans, by Bellator fans, or by PFL fans. Now, PFL may be in a unique situation, right? Because from what I've heard, and this is a rumor, I have not confirmed this, but PFL has money, has financial backing from Saudi Arabia. That's what the word on the street is. And if they have this financial backing from Saudi Arabia, then they basically have an unlimited budget. So if one championship does go under, my bet is that PFL is going to acquire them as well. And now they've got a huge roster that they can then build and create talent and create stars off of. That's the way I see it. But I mean, unless you're a hardcore MMA fan, one championship, PFL and Bellator never have really given any of us a compelling reason to tune in comparison to what the UFC has done. And to me, that is why the UFC will always be in the upper echelon of the combat sports world. With Saudi money, anything is possible. But for me, UFC trounces every single one of them every single time because they realize it's not about the money. It's about creating a compelling story. They realize it's not about the punches and kicks. It's not about the fight. It's about creating a compelling story. And they've done this since day one about why people should tune in. What was day one? Which style works better. That was a compelling story. Now it's about which person can use the style most effectively. Why are they fighting? It creates an emotional connection with the viewers. And none of the other organizations do that.